I grew up outside of Washington, D.C. in the suburbs, and the beginning of my dance career is not very illustrious. I was taken to the Gene Kelly School of Tap Dance in Johnstown, Pennsylvania when I was young, like 5 years old, but I threw up in the back seat every day from car sickness. That ended my tap career very early. In Washington, D.C., I tried to go to some ballet classes, but it never quite worked out with school and everything, and so I actually didn't start dancing until I went to the University of Maryland. And I started out as a theater major, and I was a munchkin and a peasant, and they didn't let me talk very much. So I thought I'd try my hand at dance again. And I'm really glad I did. It was not easy. I received a C in technique as a junior, and the teacher said it was a gift. So, but I persevered. I took a lot of summer workshops, those intense courses you can take in contemporary dance and ballet. And I came back as a senior, and they let me into advanced modern, which was wonderful. And then I went to UCLA Graduate School and went and taught at University of Maryland for a year, and then decided to try my luck in New York City. I met my husband, Daniel Shapiro, when I was in graduate school at UCLA, and he was a freshman and I was a graduate student. Yes, I was a tad older. Danny was born in New York, and his family moved to Los Angeles when he was, I think, 12 years old, and then he went to Beverly Hills High School, and he was doing karate, and the modern dance teacher convinced him to take dance because it would be good for his karate. And I think one of his most important early dance experiences was in Beverly Hills High. They have a quote-unquote swim gym where the top of the pool is covered by a gym floor, and then they close off the pool, cover the top of it with this gym and the gymnasium, and then they have events. Well, Danny and some of his friends went in to sort of make sure that everything was fine with the swim gym floor, and there was an old man walking around, kicking over things to make sounds and listening, and Danny and his friends ejected this gentleman. It turned out it was John Cage, who was getting ready to accompany Merce Cunningham in a lecture demonstration at Beverly Hills High. So Danny somehow was not permanently scarred by that adventure. Danny and I met again in New York City. I auditioned for the Murray Lewis Dance Company, and they said, "A kid from California just got in the company last week." And I said, "Danny." Sure enough, it was Danny. And Danny and I were in the Murray Lewis Dance Company together. We were assigned, I think, like 8 duets, and we fought through all of them. We never quite agreed on how anything was to be performed, or for that matter in later years, how anything was to be choreographed. But Danny was married at the time. I was involved with someone, but little by little, we fell madly in love. We left the Murray Lewis Dance Company in 1985 and went to Helsinki, Finland for a year, because I had gotten a Fulbright senior lectureship, which was fabulous for Danny and I. That's where we first began Shapiro and Smith Dance. And we came back to the US after a year. And this kind of brings me to the piece To Have and To Hold, which the students are performing, well, the company is performing here at the University of Washington. Danny and I got back from Helsinki, and everything had changed. Many people were dying of AIDS. At that time, this is 1986, 7, 8, something like that. 7. A lot of people had died of AIDS. A married couple that we much admired, 2 dancers, were divorced, and it just seemed that life was kind of just sliding by, and you kind of had to grab on to something and see if you could hold. And that's where the piece To Have and To Hold began. Of course, the end of that title would be Till Death Do We Part. We don't use that part of the title. The piece is lovingly called Bench, and I think we now figure that probably 700 dancers in universities and professional companies have performed it. The piece was officially choreographed in 1989. And it's been was performed for years by the Alvin Ailey Repertory Ensemble, now Alvin Ailey II, and Repertory Dance Theater in Utah. I can't even remember all the companies, and of course, so many, many university companies. I'm always shocked that that piece is still meaningful to dancers. And I always turn to the dancers who helped me set it and go, who knew? You know, it's like, what's the formula for making something like that still speaks to people? Danny and I had no idea that this piece would become one of our signature works. At the time, we were making a trio, which I just adored, and that had one performance only. It was terrible. And a friend came, we were at the Yard in Martha's Vineyard. A friend came to see our work, and she looked at the trio, and I said, I'm so excited about this. And she said, well, darling, yes, it's quite nice, but I think that bench piece you should pay a little more attention to. Oh, okay. So Danny died, unfortunately, very unfortunately, in 2006. In 2002, he was diagnosed with advanced prostate cancer at the age of 44. He had been ill for a while. And we didn't know what was wrong. They were doing all kinds of tests, and everyone was, of course, shocked that it was prostate cancer. I have to admire him tremendously because we were touring all through his 4 years that he fought the cancer. We were touring a piece called Anytown with Bruce Springsteen's music. And Danny, at the end of each show, and he would say, I've recently been diagnosed with metastatic 4-stage prostate cancer, the audience. And then he would talk to all the men in the audience about getting tested, about getting a PSA. And I think that was his mission. And during the years that we toured that's what he did, is he spoke at each performance, and we called it PSA in the USA, a sort of a play on Bruce Springsteen's album, Born in the USA. You know, it's interesting to think about Shapiro and Smith Dance in terms of its mission, because there's an official mission statement that I doubt I could remember at this point because it was written 26, 27 years ago. I know that what's very important to me and to the dancers in Shapiro and Smith Dance, and I say we all the time, even though Danny has passed on, because the dancers are very much partners with me in the creation of things and in maintaining the repertory. But I think what's important to us is that people see themselves on stage when we perform. And I think the greatest compliment after a show is when someone comes up to us and says, that's just like what happened to me. I felt that exact same thing. I was thinking that was just like what I felt. And that is incredibly satisfying. We also like to push the envelope as much as possible with physicality. I like making funny dances. Yes, I do. It's fun to make funny dances. I think it's really risky, and every time we make a quote unquote funny dance, I sit there and say, do you think that's gonna be funny? Would you have laughed at that? I don't know. But I think also the company has changed over the years. We were touring so much, and not as much now, not for any particular reason other than that many of the dancers I have in the company are in their late 20s, middle 30s. They have families, children, lives. They teach at universities and things, and it's difficult for them to get up and go on the road all the time. Of course, if someone would invite us to Paris for a week, we wouldn't turn it down. But we try to do a lot in our area of the world right now, which is the Midwest. We're currently located in Minneapolis, and I say currently because you never know. We were in New York, a New York company for, I guess 18 years. I can't remember how many years this is and that is. But right now it's really a pleasure to be able to be in my home and rehearsing in a studio close to my home and have dogs and a garden, which is a real pleasure. And all the years of touring, Danny and I were always desperately broke when we were at home in New York City. And so we spent most of our married life in hotels. So it's kind of a pleasure not to always be in hotels. My favorite thing is what I'm doing right here now. at the University of Washington and other places is going in and setting Shapiro and Smith repertory. That's really, especially on the chamber dance company, which is amazing. I mean, this is peopled by dancers who have had professional careers, who continue to have professional careers. So it's like getting to have your dream company. Well, it's like getting to work on your own company. It's fantastic. So that's very enjoyable. And making work on the dancers in Shapiro and Smith Dance right now is, I guess, the mission.
So when Hannah called to ask me if I would dance this piece again, I went to sleep that night and I had a dream about the piece, and I knew that I was meant to dance it again. And I'd had this experience on the last night that we performed it, the first time we danced it. The last performance, this last image in the dance of coming up from underneath and touching our person's chest, and feeling sort of the finality of that moment in our last performance. And I felt so sad afterward that was the last time I would be able to experience that. So it really was such a wonderful surprise that we were going to do this again, and that I would be able to be a part of it again. And to come into it also with some knowledge of what the learning process was like, and some information about how to feel a little bit more comfortable through that process, I think. And a little bit more familiar with the benches and the movement, and that was all, made it all the more joyous to come back to it. And to discover new things within it, and certainly to discover new things dancing with new people. And initially actually feeling like, oh, I remember this one part with so-and-so, and I loved that part so much, and I wish that were there again. And then being able to let that go and find new dimensions of it with each person that was in this new cast. And also feeling, 3 years later in a very different place in my own life, and being able to connect with certain emotional components of the piece that weren't there before, or there's just a shift in where the points of connection are. And I think that's a beautiful thing about being able to return to any piece that you've danced before, to feel how you as a person are different within that world.
So I think coming into it for the first time, the biggest challenge is the obvious physical nature of the benches. They are hard, and they are sharp, and they are fairly unforgiving, and they are low. And I think there's a lot of learning curve when you first start to learn this dance about how close is too close, how much is too far, and you are rewarded with a bruise, quite a deep, dark bruise if you miscalculate.
Many of them.
Yeah.
I was less bruised this time than I was initially learning the dance. I think there was a little bit more knowledge about how to soften the surface of the bench, even though it is the bench that it is, finding ways to meld into it, and being able to watch people like Wilson, who have done the dance many, many times, seeing how the movement softens into the bench, that it becomes not this really hard surface, but something that a surface that we can kind of melt into a little bit, even though it is the surface that it is. But still some bruising. Yeah, and definitely I think you were talking about the level of the benches, the height of the benches. Getting accustomed to being low enough to really find that smoothness of contact was challenging.
Well, I think whenever you're resetting a dance that's been created already, I'm always really cognizant of the fact that when this was made, people probably were having a lot more fun playing and just seeing what was possible, and so these things maybe felt a little more familiar to their body or agreeable to their movement style. When you're learning it, you sort of have to fit into what's happening and fit into it rather quickly and neatly. And if you have different proportions, or you have different timing or relationship height-wise, it's what it is. So it can be challenging that way. And such a different experience than creating it.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I'm recalling a story about the sort of steep learning curve of working with the benches. The first week or so of rehearsal, there was a little bit of, I don't want to say a negative attitude in the grad office about the piece, but certainly some question marks about why are we doing this, and don't they know how old we are? And, my colleague Pablo was saying, boy, I think this is just to make sure we were ready to quit dancing, because I know the answer now. When you're doing these repeated dives and rolls and your shoulders bleeding and you're getting these bruises, and I was getting a little frustrated, thinking, where's the 1920s modern dance piece where we get to wear big vests and vestments and just wave our arms around like we're 40. But it's been sort of strange to be so clear that this is too hard. I am working too hard. It's too much for my body. To then the next wave of, all right, well, it's kind of feeling like it's coming and it's not as hard. We're doing it less repetitions. We're doing less run-throughs. It still hurts. And now it's just sort of a joy to do, and you look forward to it, and all the crashing to my knees and stuff is just sort of part of the fun. So
Yeah.
it's been a fun progression of just from I don't want to do this into I can't wait to perform it.
Yeah.
I'm going to say that the emotional and performative challenges are something that are starting to come up now as we've been running it, so we're very familiar with it now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm no longer thinking about steps and approach in and out of the benches. I'm starting to be able to feel the piece, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
And especially having had some time, interestingly, with Joni, who spoke a lot about sort of the joy and community of it, where I was really anticipating some of the heavier elements of the piece to come up that sort of didn't with Joni. But Wilson has certainly talked a lot about what this piece comes from, and the AIDS epidemic being such a large part of its creation. So I think as we're getting comfortable, and I'm starting to feel comfortable with my cast, and we're able to touch each other in a way that's a little less analytical and a little bit more performative, I'm starting to feel a little bit of a heaviness toward the end. When we get to the coffin section and we are getting to the death section, I'm starting to, plus it's at the end of a really hard show, so I'm feeling it, but but I'm starting to get into it a little more.
Yeah, and I think finding the tone of each section has been challenging this time as well, allowing each of them to be sort of their own entity, but to still feel the progression of those different sections. That it really is this story that unfolds through those sections, and we end in kind of an epitaph a little bit. Yeah.
And there's a challenge to that, I think, when you know how it ends, and that's what's influencing your performance and your approach. It's kind of hard to be light and gay in the beginning. So it is a challenge that way.
I think one of the things that has been easy, though, about the emotional and performative components of it is really just enjoying these people so much and enjoying dancing with these people, that I feel like we all have, outside of this piece, wonderful relationships with each other, and to let that be there from the beginning has been really nice.
It was kind of fun today. Brenna stepped into my cast because her track was performed by a woman who's injured, Kyle. And so Brenna stepped in, and about midway through the dance, I don't really see her track so much in the dance. And about midway through, we embraced, and I realized, we've never done this. And it was just, there was something sort of lovely and fresh about it. Like it just felt, it felt so raw in a way.
Yeah, and sincere and genuine.
Yeah. And negotiating too, like, your arm might not go above, it might go under, and
Right,
all that.
exactly.
All those little micro fixes.
Yeah.
Wilson staged this piece a little bit like a kamikaze. He literally taught every step of 6 tracks. Literally taught every step of 6 tracks. And a lot of people, when you come into a rehearsal, will just sort of have people who aren't currently working go to a video and learn material. And I would try and do some of that, because after a few days, I thought I got to give this guy a break and just know what the heck I'm going to do, so he doesn't have to learn my track and teach it to me. But I mean, he had this like hieroglyphic notebook that you would look at it, and it was like writings of a serial killer. Like it would take forensic teams months to analyze it, and we kept looking at it going, that's amazing.
Yeah.
But he had these tiny letters and signals and signs, and literally taught everything. And he looked exhausted at the end of the day. Like, I can't imagine how exhausted he was.
Yeah, it's an impressive feat to keep track of all of those things. Yeah.
There's one particular moment in his solo. We've been coached to try to interact with each other, see each other, feel each other. And I'm trying to do that with my partners as I'm dancing, but there's a moment in his solo where he's on the bench by himself, and he sort of leans back in an off-center balance and like spreads it around and like pulls into it and shoots back out of it. And it's like one of the most intimate moments in the dance, and it's him with a bench. It's really beautiful.
Yeah.
It's really beautiful.
I love that moment too.
Yeah.
I always think it's so tender.
It is.
And it's sort of this sense of, this is the world that we're coming into, and this is the warming of that world, like the softening of that world for us, and he can bring us all into that space.
Yeah. And I think there are many parts of this concert I feel very lucky to be a part of, just given my place in life and the works that we're doing. But I really feel like I have a little bit of a lottery experience just being able to be in Wilson's cast, because he is so infectious to dance with in that way too. And I don't really ever notice a mark or a sort of a half attempt at doing just to sort of save himself. And even if he is maybe going a little easier, there's still this full, vivacious, like chest and face, and it's just sees you. And it's one of those things that could, like if the wrong person were doing it, it could almost come off as cheesy or performative, but it's just so real and raw and wonderful.
Yeah, and that I think matches his personality too,
Yeah.
and came across in his staging of the work. This care and sincerity, and being able to have humor about it, but also to recognize sort of the serious themes that we're touching on.
Yeah.
And, I think.
And a generous spirit too. I have to touch on that too. A lot of people will come in and stage, and by the end of the day, if we're rehearsing it later in the day and people are tired and their energy and their attention span gets a little bit out to the periphery, it can be very easy to sort of lose your temper and snap and you know, let's get things back. And for somebody of Wilson's caliber and his career, he just had such patience and such a calm nature, which is just bizarre. He could kind of laugh and joke with it and then pull us back in a very gentle way, and there was never any harsh, whipping or cracking the whip. And I don't know, I think that's a really rare quality, and something I, as a teacher, as a choreographer, really admire when I see, because it's very hard to keep my temper sometimes. And when I see somebody who is so beautiful and so masterful, not need to use harsh language or tone. It's just, it's wonderful to see how effective it can still be.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think for starters, this piece has a really important place in the modern dance canon, just because of the themes that it addresses. That the AIDS epidemic was such a significant force, particularly in the dance world, and for us to be able to recognize that and heal through it, through this expression of the body, I think is a really important thing to have happened at that time, and an important thing for us to continue to recognize, that there is healing and acknowledgement that happens through the physical processes of choreographing and performing. So I think for that reason it's really important. It's very representative of that time.
And I would also say to that, there's something disturbing almost performing this with younger people, in the sense that they don't know that period of time. They don't know what it was like, and it's sort of a moment in the history books. So when Wilson's talking about it, or people are talking about it, and you see them nodding with sort of ambivalence, like they're trying to get it, but they really have no way to actually understand everyone you know dropping dead and no one having any idea what it is, how to fix it. You've got, you know, government agencies in the medical community not working for you. I mean, it was really something. And I hope that through maybe the performance of the piece, that some of the younger students in it can touch a little piece of that. I mean, it's a beautiful thing, they don't know that, but it's also an important thing to remember. And I hope they can touch a little piece of that. I also would say that this piece has a real relevance in the modern dance canon, in that Shapiro and Smith were such a big force in the modern dance world for a period of time, and you don't see a lot of their work anymore, and there's so much that's so important, and this is sort of one of the pinnacles of their career. So I think it is really important to have it around and to remember the sort of combination of athleticism, physicality, just, I'll use the word again, kamikaze nature on props, where you just had people really exploring something and having fun with it, and it's just nice to remember that, to remember that period of time and to have that represented and shown. I think it's not something you see much of anymore right now, at least in this period in modern dance.
And I think what you don't see as much now is, you do see that athleticism, but you don't see as much the athleticism really infused with humanity. People dancing on stage with each other in very powerful and athletic ways, but still humans.
And beauty in a different way than a lot of dance is beauty. It's where it's not about the line and the shape and the legs and the feet. It's not about the facility. It's sort of about the expression, and that's where the real power lies. And I think even watching it on a video, you can start to see like, oh wow, these people did not have this amazing technique or facility, but you just can't help but be mesmerized by their dancing and their movement. And I think that is so important to remember. We are in such a technically proficient stage in the dance sort of lexicon, and it just is important to remember that really crucial element of somebody who can convey what's happening just by the way in which they do something.
That's right.
How it all began with my history with Bench and with Shapiro and Smith kind of ended up being at the same time. I was an undergrad at Montclair State working towards an acting degree. Friends in the dance program convinced me to come and audition for the dance program. So I reached the head of the dance program, and she mentioned there was going to be a master class, and if I would be interested in coming and taking the class, and it would be my pseudo audition into the program. She said, bring some knee pads and long sleeves. So I went in there. It started with just a regular warm-up. Danny and Joni were leading the warm-up. And then halfway through the class, they pull out these benches and they start sliding and tucking and rolling and flipping all over it. And I was just in awe of it all. I think my fear of why I was there dissipated, and now my fear was just at the task at hand, which I think would kind of help me in many ways. So next thing I knew, I was casted in the piece, and I got into the dance program. I continued working with Danny and Joni. At that time, Shapiro and Smith was a company in residency at Montclair State. So by the time I graduated, I knew 7 of their pieces. It's my last quarter, my last semester, excuse me, at Montclair, and somebody in the company gave their notice, and it happened to be somebody that was a male, my height, my size, and they invited me to audition, and I, of course, took up on it. I was taking my finals while rehearsing in New York City to perform at the Joys with them. 2 weeks after I finished my last quarter, I was traveling with them, going to Hawaii and Singapore, and so, I mean, it could not happen. I mean, it was meant to happen. That's the way I look at it. It was meant to happen. And then I just continued dancing with them for several years. And then there was I think the speaking bug was missing in my life, so I needed to go back to acting and exercise those muscles again. So I kind of left concert dance and kind of just moved into musical theater. But even in those years, I kept coming back as somebody that would set some of their work or be even just socially talking to them. When Danny passed away and there was a service performed at the Joyce, Joni decided to do bench, and she invited me to be one of the people to come and perform at that event. I came here to the University of Washington for grad school, and my first summer, chamber dance was doing bench, so it came back around. 3 years later, as a professor now, I get to set the piece on chamber dance and dance it again. It's just one of those things that just keeps coming into my life, and to me, it's I look at it as, there is the life that you're supposed to lead and the life you're living, and when they meet is those moments of deja vu where everything kind of feels like all the pieces are coming into place. And to me, every time I kind of come into contact with this piece and with Joni and the company and the material, it kind of reminds me that I may be making the right choices because my path keeps crossing with theirs. I've had the chance to set the piece in different, wearing different hats every single time. I've said it mostly with Kelly Drummond, who I was in the company with during those 3.5 years. And she really was the person that was in charge of setting the piece a lot. She knew it very well, and she would always kind of bring somebody else in the company depending on where she was setting it. So I got the chance to set it with her. We set it at Purchase. I think we did it at Montclair as well. We did it for Ailey too, which was really exciting. We also did it, I think we did it at Potsdam. Where else? I think those are the ones that kind of stick out to me. Then setting it here, I mean, it's complete. Approaching it now, after being away from it for such a long time, I think it's done something to me in a way that maybe it's just me. I put a little bit more pressure on myself while doing it, and not in a bad way. I just think that, when I was with the company, I was submerged in their material. So I was kind of breathing and living and sweating with that material. And then all of a sudden I'd been distant from it for a long time. So to revisit it for myself, I had to really prepare to get my body to move in those ways again. And to refamiliarize my body to not just the material, but the benches themselves. And that played a trick on me because my memory of when I was doing it was as a 20-some-old dancer. Now I'm in my 40s and my body moves differently. So there was something that kind of changed in my approach. And I think that how I try to approach it now is on the meaning of it as opposed to the physicality of it, and hoping that the meaning informs the physicality so that everything arrives at the same place. And I think also, just the material itself plays a different, has a different weight in my life now. And I think that because of that, it's gotten a little bit thicker, and it's a little bit more connected to my breath as opposed to just the ability to point my foot and get my leg up. That's important in many ways, but I can't approach it that way because my body has changed. So it was a different approach, which was daunting, but kind of exciting, and I think more rewarding than my memory of 18 years ago. I became very aware in the process that there was a responsibility to the material being passed on to a younger generation in many ways, even though a lot of the people in the company are very much my age. But there was still the importance of passing that information to some of my students who are undergrads. And because of that, it kind of just, I was constantly wearing a different hat, but still remembering the kind of culture that Danny and Johnny created in the company, which was very much about, you already got into the room, now it's just about having some fun here. And we're all going to be working at 110%, but you don't have to prove anything right now. Just do it. Just get up and do it, and fail at it, and then get up and dust yourself off and do it again. And I think that that was kind of like the motivation, I think. But there's also something kind of cool about the fact that when performing it, this is besides from setting it, when actually performing it, there is no different hats. Like all of a sudden the music goes on and I don't know really who you are except somebody who I'm supposed to hold and truly mean how I'm holding them. And I think that that's kind of cool. That material and the pieces and dance can actually do that. Put all the classism and titles away and just connect with each other in a place, in a way that is meaningful and community building and just tactile, and I don't know, it just kind of has this feeling of like we arrived at the end together as opposed to let's see who gets there. The topic itself is it's really heavy. I mean, this idea that you are saying that you're trying to hold on to the people that mean something to your life, but that they might not be there, I think is really heavy topic. Now, the idea of it being inspired by the AIDS epidemic, some people don't know what that is. And I don't think it has even anything to do with grads or undergrads. I think even some people who were in their 20s and 30s in the 80s might not have related to the AIDS epidemic in the way some people did. So there are just some information that I would relate to this, to create that kind of urgency, that kind of bubbling energy underneath the material. And that was, people were just leaving the earth very quickly. The people that you would see down the street who you always thought were beautiful and stunning and full of life, 2 weeks later, they looked gaunt and scary and afraid, and that played a major role in this piece. But not everybody relates to that information. Now, I think that the beauty of something, of a piece like Bench or To Have and to Hold, is that it still has a universal feel to it, and we all can relate to loss, and we all can relate to fear, and we all can relate to feeling lonesome in some way or another. So, yeah, I shared the information of what was the AIDS epidemic and what was happening in the 80s and how a community was completely eradicated and nobody was there to help. But that might not land the way I intended it to. So then I kind of would approach it in different ways. What are you trying to say here? Like, let's connect with each other as dancers. Like, you are sliding on a bench. And I think that just the physicality of it can take you to a place that helps you connect to your psyche and your emotions and your breath in a way that I think could inform the audience as to the main idea of what this piece was. Even if people don't really get a meaning out of it, there's still some kind of awesome physicality being demonstrated. There's also some kind of joy in the process of the hardness of these steps and how once a dancer gets to perform them. And I think also it's sexy, you know? It's so like, it has meaning, it's great physicality, it's sexy, and you can see dancers going through something. So I don't know what else is there, you know? It has something. It has something that I think it just makes people connect. And even for myself, like I watch it and I've seen it so many times and I've danced it so many times and I look at it and I go, I never thought of that. Just simple little touches and looks that people just bring to the table that just kind of makes it go, oh, there is something deeper than what the original idea was all about, you know? And I think that that's what carries not just dance, but any kind of art form, that kind of connection to what's happening around us that makes it universal and human. And did I say sexy? You know, sexy is good too. I think sexy is very important.